Everything about our technology was flawless. That's why no one could explain why a human's boot fixed it. You know what the problem is with humans? They don't respect physics. I mean really truly fundamentally don't respect it. They treat the laws of the universe like suggestions at a buffet, picking and choosing which ones to follow based on what convenience, mood, the alignment of their primitive planetary satellites. My name is Kelrith Voss, and I've been a gravitational transport engineer for the Andurian Collective for 23 cycles. 23 cycles. That's longer than some species exist before they blow themselves up or get absorbed into a neighboring empire. In those 23 cycles, I have designed, maintained, and perfected anti-gravity vehicles that would make your average physicist weep with joy. Quantum-stabilized field generators, micro-adjusted graviton emitters, self-correcting altitude dampeners that can detect a variance of 0.0003% and compensate before you even know there was a problem. I am very good at what I do, or at least I thought I was, until I met Ambassador Jonas Reich. The setting for my complete and utter humiliation was the Andorian colony world of Tessara Prime, a beautiful little planet we'd been terraforming for the last century. Well, when I say terraforming, I mean we'd been carefully adjusting the atmospheric composition, regulating the tectonic patterns, and establishing a perfectly balanced ecosystem that would support a population of approximately 4.6 million residents in optimal comfort. We don't just slap down some buildings and call it a day, unlike certain species I could mention but won't, because I'm a professional. Tessara Prime was home to our regional governance center, which meant we hosted embassies from about 40 different species. Most of them were reasonable folks. The Kalish kept to themselves and their gardens. The Torcana loved our restaurant. The Vendri were a bit uptight about noise regulations, but you could work with them. And then there were the humans. The Terran embassy had been established 6 months ago, right around the same time I'd been promoted to senior transport engineer for the diplomatic quarter. Lucky me, right? The humans had sent a small staff, maybe 20 people to handle their affairs, 20 people who somehow generated more maintenance requests than the other 39 embassies combined. Their climate control systems ran too cold, their water recyclers made weird noise, their doors didn't open fast enough, which apparently was a problem because humans are always in a rush to get somewhere, even when they have absolutely nowhere to be. But the transport vehicles, the transport vehicles were my responsibility, and let me tell you, I took that responsibility seriously. Each embassy had access to a fleet of standard diplomatic cruisers. These were top-of-the-line Andorian engineering, sleek silver pods that could seat 6 comfortably, cruise at 200 kilometers per hour while maintaining perfect stability, and operated on graviton fields so precisely calibrated that you could balance a stack of fine crystal glasses on the dashboard and not lose a single one during flight. They were silent, efficient, and absolutely categorically 100% reliable, until they weren't. It was a Wednesday morning, which I only mentioned because Wednesday was supposed to be my easy day. You know, catch up on routine diagnostics, review the maintenance logs, maybe calibrate a few secondary systems. Nothing exciting, nothing stressful, just a nice calm predictable Wednesday. The distress call came in at approximately hour mark 6:15. Yeah, hi. This is Ambassador Reich. Our car stopped working. We're kind of just floating here, about 30 meters up, over the central plaza. Yeah, it's a little awkward. People are staring. Could you maybe send someone? I nearly dropped my diagnostic tablet. A gravitational transport doesn't just stop. That's not how they work. The field generators have 17 redundant backup systems. The power cores have a failure rate of less than 0.0001%. You have a better chance of spontaneously developing psychic powers than you do of having an anti-gravity vehicle just quit on you mid-flight. And yet, there it was. A diplomatic cruiser, registration number DT7429, hovering exactly 31.4 meters above the central plaza like some kind of metallic party balloon. Completely motionless except for a slight rotation caused by the morning breeze. I grabbed my emergency toolkit, which weighed approximately 15 kilos and contained every specialized instrument known to Andorian engineering, and sprinted for my own transport. The trip to the central plaza took 4 minutes, which felt like 4 hours because my mind was already racing through every possible failure scenario. Graviton emitter cascade. No, that would cause a drop, not a hover freeze. Power core fluctuation. Impossible. The backups would have kicked in automatically. Software corruption. The system runs on quantum-locked code that literally cannot be altered without physical access to the core processor. By the time I arrived at the plaza, A small crowd had gathered. Naturally, because nothing attracts attention quite like a floating vehicle full of diplomats stuck in midair. I could see faces pressed against the transparent lower panels of the cruiser, and one of those faces belonged to a human who was, I swear on my ancestors, smiling and waving at the crowd below like this was some kind of parade. I activated my personal gravity harness and ascended to meet them, my toolkit maglocked to my back. As I approached the cruiser, I could see Ambassador Reich in the pilot's seat, his expression remarkably calm for someone whose vehicle had catastrophically failed. Next to him sat another human, a woman with short red hair who appeared to be eating something. While suspended in a malfunctioning death trap, I maneuvered to the access panel on the underside of the cruiser and popped it open. My fingers already reaching for my diagnostic scanner, the internal readouts made absolutely no sense. Power core, operating at 98% efficiency, graviton emitters, all 17 functioning normally, stabilizers, perfect, backup systems, on standby as they should be. Everything was working, except the vehicle wasn't moving. "What's the diagnosis, Doc?" Ambassador Reich called down through the open panel. "I don't understand," I muttered, running the scanner over the primary field generator for the third time. "Every system is operational. There's no reason for this vehicle to be non-responsive. It should be working perfectly, but it's not," the red-haired woman pointed out helpfully. "Yes, thank you, I'm aware," I snapped, immediately regretting my tone. "Diplomacy, Kelrith. These are ambassadors. Be professional. My apologies. I'm simply confused. This shouldn't be possible." I spent the next 20 minutes running every diagnostic protocol I knew. I checked the quantum processors. I analyzed the power distribution networks. I even physically inspected the graviton emitter arrays with my own two eyes, looking for some microscopic flaw that my scanners might have missed. Nothing. The vehicle was, by every measurable standard, in perfect working condition. It just refused to actually work. "Okay," I finally said, floating there beneath the cruiser with my toolkit scattered around me in midair like some kind of bizarre orbital debris field. "I'm going to need to call in a specialist team. This is beyond my immediate ability to diagnose. We'll need to carefully tow the vehicle to a maintenance facility and perform a complete system teardown. It should only take, 6 to 8 hours, maybe 10 if we find something particularly unusual." There was a moment of silence from above. Then I heard the door open. 6 to 8 hours? Ambassador Reich said. "Yeah, we don't really have that kind of time. We've got a meeting with the Kalish delegation at hour mark 7. Important trade stuff, very diplomatic." "I understand, Ambassador, but this is a complex technical situation that requires—" "Hold on a second." I heard movement, footsteps on the cruiser's interior deck. Then, the sound of the outer hull access opening, and then, Ambassador Jonas Reich, human diplomat and apparent lunatic, climbed out onto the top of the cruiser, 31.4 meters above the central plaza, with no gravity harness. "Ambassador," I shrieked, my voice cracking in a way that was absolutely not dignified for a senior transport engineer. "Ambassador, please, get back inside the vehicle immediately. You don't have a safety harness. You could fall." "Relax, Kelrith," he called back, and I could hear the smile in his voice. The smile. "I've got great balance. Took gymnastics as a kid." "Gymnastics," I repeated flatly. "You took gymnastics as a child. And you believe this qualifies you to stand on top of a malfunctioning anti-gravity vehicle suspended 30 meters above a hard surface?" "Sure, why not?" I was going to file a complaint. A formal, written, notarized complaint with the diplomatic corps about humans and their complete disregard for basic safety protocols. Right after I prevented this maniac from becoming a very messy statistic, I jetted upward, my gravity harness whining slightly under the acceleration, and positioned myself near the top of the cruiser where Ambassador Reich stood with his hands on his hips, looking down at the vehicle like a homeowner examining a problematic roof. "Ambassador, I must insist. What kind of anti-grav system does this thing use?" he interrupted, crouching down and rapping his knuckles against the hull. "Graviton emitters. Repulsor fields. Some kind of exotic matter configuration." I blinked. "You're familiar with gravitational propulsion theory. I read a lot of science fiction as a kid," he said cheerfully. "Picked up some stuff. So which is it?" "Quantum-stabilized graviton field generators with micro-adjusted emitter arrays and self-correcting altitude dampeners operating on a closed-loop feedback system that monitors and adjusts 17 different variables 2,000 times per second to maintain perfect stability and responsiveness." I rattled off automatically, then caught myself. "But that's not the point. The point is you need to get back inside before 2,000 times per second. He let out a low whistle. That's impressive. Really impressive. Probably cost a fortune to develop. The Andorian Collective spent 40 years perfecting this technology, I said, feeling a small surge of pride despite the circumstances. These vehicles represent the pinnacle of gravitational engineering. They're masterpieces of precision and reliability, which is why this malfunction is so impossible. I could feel my face flushing, that distinctive purple tint that Andorians get when we're stressed. This wasn't just embarrassing, it was professionally devastating. My beautiful, perfect, absolutely reliable transport system had failed in the most public way possible, and I had no idea why. Every sensor, every diagnostic, every scan told me the same thing. Everything was working exactly as designed, but it wasn't. The cruiser just hung there, suspended, frozen, like someone had pressed pause on reality itself. Have you tried turning it off and back on again? The red-haired woman called from inside the vehicle. Of course I've tried that, I shouted back, my professional composure completely shattered now. I've tried everything. I've run level 1 through level 9 diagnostics. I've checked the power distribution, the quantum processors, the emitter alignment, the stabilizer calibration, the feedback loops, the redundancy systems, everything. And everything says this vehicle should be working, but it's not working, and I don't know why. My voice had risen to what could charitably be called a panicked screech by the end of that outburst. Ambassador Reich patted my shoulder sympathetically. Rough day, huh? Rough day. I laughed, a slightly unhinged sound. Rough day. Ambassador, this vehicle uses technology that has operated flawlessly for 60 years. 60 years. We have deployed over 4 million of these transports across 230 worlds, and the total failure rate is 0.0008%. Do you understand what that means? It means this right here. This should not be happening, but it is happening, he pointed out, with that infuriating human logic that's somehow both completely obvious and completely unhelpful. Yes, thank you. I'm aware. I clutched my scanner with both hands, resisting the urge to throw it into the plaza below. I don't understand. The graviton emitters are functioning. The power core is stable. The quantum processors are operating within normal parameters. There's no logical reason for this malfunction. None. I pulled up the diagnostic readout again, staring at the rows of green indicators like they'd personally betrayed me. Which in a way they had. See? I thrust the scanner toward the ambassador. All green. Everything nominal. Power at 98%, which is actually above the standard operating level. Field coherence at 99.6%. Emitter synchronization perfect. Altitude hold systems responsive. It's all perfect. It's all working. Except it's not. Ambassador Reich studied the readout, nodding slowly. Huh. That is weird. Weird? Weird? Ambassador. This is catastrophic. This is a fundamental breakdown of physical law. This is the kind of malfunction that makes you question everything you know about reality. Or, he said, his tone shifting to something thoughtful, maybe it's just a loose connection somewhere. I stared at him. A loose connection.
Yeah.
Like maybe something got jostled, and there's a wire or a component that's not quite seated properly. Happens all the time with Earth tech. Ambassador, this is not Earth tech. This is Andorian engineering. We don't have loose connections. Every component is molecularly bonded to its housing. Every connection is verified with quantum-level precision. The entire vehicle is essentially one solid piece of integrated technology. Right, he said, nodding. Very advanced, very precise, very, quantum. He stood up, still balanced casually on top of the cruiser like he wasn't defying death with every movement, and walked around to the other side, examining the hull. Inside the vehicle, the red-haired woman had finished whatever she was eating and was now recording the whole thing on a personal device, narrating quietly. Day 173 on Tessara Prime. Our transport broke down. Kelrith is having a mental breakdown. Jonas is being Jonas. I give it 5 minutes before something weird happens. I heard that, Detective Ramirez. I called down. You were supposed to. She called back cheerfully. Ambassador Wright completed his circuit of the cruiser's top, hands still on his hips, head tilted like he was studying a particularly interesting puzzle. You know what this reminds me of, he said, more to himself than to me. I cannot possibly imagine, I replied, my voice dripping with exhaustion. My dad's old truck, back on Earth. Thing was older than I was, ran on actual combustion engines. Can you believe that? Burning refined petroleum for propulsion. Anyway, it would do this thing sometimes where it would just stop. Everything seemed fine, engine would turn over. Battery was good, but it just wouldn't go. I floated there, toolkit dangling from one hand, trying to find the connection between a primitive combustion vehicle and my beautiful quantum-stabilized transport system. I'm not sure how that's relevant, Ambassador, and you know what my dad would do? He didn't wait for me to answer. He'd pop the hood, lean in real close, and then he'd smack the starter motor with a wrench. Hard. And 9 times out of 10, the truck would start right up. I felt my left eye twitch. Ambassador, are you actually suggesting that we hit this vehicle? Percussive maintenance, he said, nodding sagely. It's a time-honored human tradition. Percussive maintenance, I repeated slowly, tasting each word like it was poison. You want to apply kinetic force to a quantum-stabilized gravitational propulsion system. A system that operates on the manipulation of fundamental space-time geometries. A system where the emitter arrays are calibrated to tolerances measured in angstroms. A system where the slightest misalignment would cause catastrophic field collapse. I mean, when you put it that way, it sounds bad, Ambassador Reich admitted. Because it is bad. Ambassador, I cannot adequately express how monumentally terrible that idea is. You don't hit precision instruments. You don't apply random force to quantum systems. That's not how any of this works. Detective Ramirez's voice floated up from inside the cruiser. To be fair, Kelrith, what you're doing doesn't seem to be working either, because the malfunction doesn't make sense. I practically wailed. I need time to properly analyze the situation. I need to bring in specialists. I need to carefully disassemble the system in a controlled environment and determine the root cause through methodical investigation. Or, Ambassador Reich said, and hear me out here, or I could just kick it. Absolutely not. Just one good kick. Right there. He pointed to the housing that contained the primary graviton emitter. The primary emitter. The most sensitive, most crucial, most expensive component in the entire system. Ambassador, I am formally forbidding you from kicking this vehicle. As the senior transport engineer, I have the authority to. Ambassador. Ambassador, what are you doing? Ambassador. Step away from the emitter housing. Don't you dare. Don't. He kicked it. Ambassador Jonas Reich, human diplomat, pulled his leg back and delivered a solid, forceful kick directly to the primary graviton emitter housing with his standard-issue embassy footwear. The metallic clang echoed across the plaza. For exactly 2.3 seconds nothing happened. 2.3 seconds during which I experienced every stage of grief simultaneously. Denial that this was actually happening. Anger that he'd ignored my explicit instructions, bargaining with whatever cosmic forces might be listening that the emitter hadn't been damaged, depression about my ruined career, and acceptance that I would probably be demoted to cleaning waste reclamation filters in some backwater station for the rest of my natural life. And then, the cruiser hummed to life, just like that. The familiar soft vibration of active graviton emitters, the gentle glow of the status indicators shifting from standby to operational, the quiet whir of the stabilizers engaging and compensating for the morning breeze. All systems, suddenly, inexplicably, working perfectly. There we go, Ambassador Reich said brightly, clapping his hands together. Good as new. Thanks for your help, Kelrith. We'll get out of your hair now. Wouldn't want to be late for that meeting. I couldn't speak. Literally couldn't form words. My mouth opened and closed like some kind of aquatic creature struggling on land. But no sounds emerged except for a faint squeaking noise that I'm not entirely proud of. The ambassador climbed back inside the cruiser, settled into the pilot's seat, and gave me a cheerful wave through the transparent canopy. Detective Ramirez was grinning like she'd just witnessed the funniest thing in the universe, which, from her perspective, she probably had. The cruiser descended smoothly, touched down in the designated landing zone, and the two humans disembarked like absolutely nothing unusual had happened. Like they hadn't just violated every principle of engineering I'd ever learned. Like they hadn't just proven that 60 years of Endurian technological advancement could be defeated by footwear and kinetic energy. Ambassador Reich looked up at me, still floating there in a state of complete cognitive dissonance. You okay up there, Kelrith? How? I finally managed to croak out. How did that work? He shrugged. Sometimes things just need a little encouragement. But that doesn't. I jetted down to the plaza, landing with less grace than usual because my brain was currently trying to rewrite everything it knew about cause and effect. Ambassador, what you just did should not have worked. It cannot have worked. The systems don't operate on principles that would respond to percussive force. There's no mechanism by which a kick could restore functionality to a quantum-stabilized field generator. And yet, Detective Ramirez said, still grinning, it did work. So maybe your understanding of the systems is incomplete. My understanding is not incomplete. I designed these systems. Well, not personally, but I've worked with them for 23 cycles. I know every circuit, every component, every line of code, and nothing in any of that knowledge explains how kicking the emitter housing could possibly restore function. Ambassador Reich patted my shoulder again. Look, Kelrith, I'm sure there's a perfectly logical explanation. Maybe the kick realigned some internal component. Maybe it dislodged some debris we couldn't detect. Maybe it completed an electrical connection that had been interrupted. The point is, it worked. And now we can get to our meeting. But I need to understand why it worked. I protested, clutching my scanner with both hands. I need to document this. I need to file a report. I need to figure out what was wrong so it doesn't happen again. Good luck with that, Detective Ramirez said, heading toward the embassy building. Let us know what you find out. They left. They just left. Walked away like they hadn't just shattered my entire worldview. Like they hadn't just proven that my sophisticated, precisely engineered quantum-stabilized technology could be fixed with the same method humans use on their primitive combustion engines. I stood there in the plaza, surrounded by curious onlookers, having what I can only describe as an existential crisis. What if everything I knew was wrong? What if all our careful engineering, all our precise calculations, all our quantum-level manufacturing tolerances were just unnecessary? What if the universe didn't care about our elegant solutions and preferred brute force simplicity? What if the humans were right? No, that couldn't be it. There had to be a logical explanation. I rushed back to the cruiser, scanner in hand, and performed another complete diagnostic. Everything read normal, perfect, even, like there had never been a malfunction in the first place. I checked the maintenance logs. Nothing unusual, no error codes recorded, no system warnings. The vehicle's internal monitoring had detected exactly 0 problems during the entire incident. It was as if the cruiser had been working fine the whole time and had simply chosen not to cooperate until someone kicked it, which was obviously impossible. Technology doesn't have preferences. It doesn't sulk or require motivation. It follows the laws of physics, which are constant and unchanging and definitely don't care about whether you hit things with your foot. I ran my hands through my cranial crest, a nervous habit I'd developed over the years. This is insane, I muttered to myself. This is completely, utterly, fundamentally insane. A Kalish passerby, one of the gardeners from their embassy, paused near me. Are you all right, Engineer Voss? No, I said honestly. No, I am not all right. I just watched a human fix quantum technology by kicking it, and it worked. And I don't know why it worked. And my entire understanding of cause and effect is now in question. The Kalish made a sympathetic clicking sound. Ah yes. Humans, they do have a way of making things complicated. Complicated. They made it simple. That's the problem. They made it too simple. There should be complexity here. There should be nuance and technical sophistication. You can't just kick things and expect them to work. And yet, the Kalish said gently, apparently you can. They walked away, leaving me alone with my crisis and my scanner and a transport vehicle that was now functioning flawlessly despite having no logical reason to have stopped working in the first place. I looked at the cruiser. It looked back at me. If inanimate objects could look at things which they couldn't, because they were inanimate and governed by predictable physical laws, except this one apparently wasn't. I hate humans, I said to the cruiser. I hate them so much. The cruiser's status lights blinked cheerfully, as if agreeing with me. I didn't go home that night. Couldn't. The incident with the cruiser had burrowed into my brain like some kind of parasitic thought worm, and I knew I wouldn't be able to rest until I understood what had happened. So instead of returning to my comfortable apartment with its climate-controlled environment and ergonomic furniture, I went to my office and did what any reasonable engineer would do when faced with the impossible. I researched humans. Now I'd read the basic cultural briefings when the Terran embassy was established. I knew about their history, their governments, their various cuisines that all seemed to involve alarming amounts of capsaicin, but I'd never really dug into their technological development, their engineering philosophy, their approach to problem solving. That was a mistake. The first thing I discovered, the very first thing, was something called percussive maintenance. Turns out, Ambassador Reich hadn't been joking. It was an actual documented widespread human practice. They had a technical term for it, and everything. Well, several technical terms actually. Percussive maintenance, kinetic persuasion, technical tap, and my personal favorite, discovered in a particularly ancient Earth database, whacking it until it works. I sat back in my chair, staring at my display screen in disbelief. They have multiple names for hitting things. Multiple names, but it got worse. So much worse. I found historical records of human technology, going back centuries, and nearly every single piece of equipment had documentation of repairs that involved striking it. Old visual display units called televisions, hit them on the side. Ancient computational devices, smack the casing. Communication equipment, percussive maintenance, propulsion systems, you guessed it, hit them with tools. There were even instructional videos, actual archived footage of humans demonstrating the proper technique for hitting various devices to restore functionality. One particularly enlightening video from Earth's 20th century showed a human mechanic explaining with complete seriousness that you had to hit the starter motor at just the right angle with just the right amount of force, and that this was a perfectly normal and acceptable repair methodology. This is barbaric, I whispered to my empty office. This is absolutely barbaric, but I couldn't stop researching. It was like watching a disaster unfold, horrible and fascinating in equal measure. I discovered duct tape. Duct tape was, according to the database, adhesive fabric strip that humans use to repair approximately everything, not precision equipment, mind you. Everything. Structural damage, duct tape. Fluid leaks, duct tape. Equipment malfunction. You could probably fix it with duct tape. There were documented cases of humans using duct tape to repair spacecraft. Vessels that operate in the vacuum of space, where one tiny failure could mean catastrophic decompression and death. And humans were holding them together with sticky fabric. No, I said out loud. No, that can't be real. That has to be some kind of joke. Some kind of cultural humor I'm not understanding. But the records were clear. Multiple instances. Peer-reviewed reports from other species. The humans really did fix critical systems with adhesive tape. And then I found WD-40. WD-40 was apparently a lubricant spray that humans considered to be, and I'm quoting directly from a Terran maintenance manual here, the solution to basically any mechanical problem, according to human engineering philosophy, which I was beginning to suspect was just elaborate improvisation with a technical-sounding name. All mechanical problems could be categorized into two types: things that should move but don't, and things that shouldn't move but do. For the first category you applied WD-40, for the second category you applied duct tape. That was it. That was their entire diagnostic framework. I laughed. I actually laughed, a slightly unhinged sound that echoed off my office walls. Two solutions. They have two solutions for everything. We have 17,000-page diagnostic manuals, and they have lubricant spray and sticky tape. But here's the thing that really broke my brain. It worked. All of it, somehow, impossibly worked. The historical records showed human technology spreading across their entire planet, then to their moon, then to their neighboring planets, and eventually to the stars. And throughout all of that expansion, throughout all of that technological development, they maintained the same fundamental philosophy. If it doesn't work, hit it. If it still doesn't work, use duct tape. If that doesn't work, spray WD-40 on it. If none of that works, hit it again, harder this time. I compared this to Endurian engineering principles. Our approach was different. When we encountered a problem, we analyzed it. We ran simulations. We consulted with specialists. We developed comprehensive solutions that addressed not just the immediate issue, but also prevented future occurrences through advanced monitoring and redundant backup systems. We engineered elegance. We engineered perfection. We also, I was beginning to realize, engineered complexity. The transport cruiser that Ambassador Reich had kicked, it had 17 redundant backup systems. 17. Each one carefully designed, precisely calibrated, thoroughly tested, each one adding weight, adding cost, adding potential points of failure, because that's what redundancy means, right? More systems to fail, just differently. And all those systems, all that sophistication, hadn't prevented the malfunction, hadn't even helped diagnose it. The cruiser had simply stopped working, and all my advanced monitoring equipment had shrugged its metaphorical shoulders and said, everything's fine, while we floated helplessly above the plaza. But one human with 1 foot had fixed it in seconds. I pulled up comparative maintenance records. The data was troubling. Human equipment had higher individual failure rates than Endurian technology, that was true, but their repair times were absurdly short. Average time to restore functionality, minutes, sometimes seconds. Our average repair time, hours. Sometimes days when we had to order specialized components or wait for consultant teams. I found incident reports from other species who'd interacted with human engineers. A Vendry military vessel had suffered a catastrophic environmental system failure in deep space. They'd calculated 4 days until life support exhausted. The human ship that responded to their distress call had an engineer who fixed it in 45 minutes using something called zip ties, electrical tape, and this weird tool that's like a wrench but also kind of a hammer. A Torcana research station had lost power to their primary laboratory. Human technicians had restored it by, I'm reading directly from the report here, jiggling some wires and hitting the junction box a few times. The Torcana scientists had been horrified. The equipment worked perfectly for the next 3 years. There were dozens of these stories. Hundreds, actually. Humans fixing sophisticated alien technology with methods that should not work, that could not work according to any reasonable understanding of engineering principles, but that did work, repeatedly, reliably. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling of my office. What if we've been doing it wrong? I said to nobody. What if all our precision, all our careful planning, all our elegant solutions, what if we've just been over-engineering everything? The thought was heretical. I'd spent my entire career, my entire adult life, learning and applying Andurian engineering principles. The idea that those principles might be, not wrong exactly, but unnecessarily complicated, that was difficult to process. I pulled up the technical specifications for our transport cruisers again, looked at them with fresh eyes. All those redundant systems, all those carefully calibrated sensors, all those quantum-level manufacturing tolerances. What if, and this was just a hypothetical, what if we didn't need most of that? What if simpler was actually better? I spent the next several hours going down a research rabbit hole. That's a human idiom I'd learned, comparing human Andurian approaches to various technologies. The patterns were consistent. We built things to never fail. They built things to fail in fixable ways. We engineered perfection. They engineered practicality. We spent years developing solutions. They spent minutes implementing repair. There was a human phrase I kept encountering in the maintenance records. If it's stupid but it works, it isn't stupid. I hated that phrase. Hated how much sense it made. Hated that I was starting to agree with it. By the time the sun rose over Tessara Prime, I had filled 3 separate data files with notes, comparisons and reluctant conclusions, and the primary conclusion, the one I really didn't want to admit but couldn't deny, was that humans had figured something out that we hadn't. Something fundamental about the nature of technology and repair and engineering philosophy. They understood that complexity was a liability, that sophistication could be a weakness, that sometimes the best solution was the simplest one even if it involved kicking things. I closed my research files and rubbed my eyes, exhausted but oddly energized. I need to talk to the ambassador again, I said to my empty office. I need to understand how they think. My office wisely didn't respond. I found Ambassador Reich in the embassy's courtyard 3 days later, working on something that looked like a small mechanical device. He was surrounded by tools, human tools, which looked like primitive versions of equipment I use daily, except his were simpler, cruder, and I was beginning to suspect, more effective. Ambassador, I said, approaching cautiously, do you have a moment? He looked up, wiped his hands on a cloth and smiled. Kelrith. Sure, always have time. What's on your mind? Another cruiser acting up? No. Actually, I wanted to ask you about the other day, about your repair methodology. His smile widened. You mean the kick? Yes, the kick. I sat down on a nearby bench, my tablet clutched in my hands. I've spent the last 72 hours researching human engineering practices, and I need to understand something. How do you know when to hit things? Is there a formula, a diagnostic framework, some kind of systematic approach? Ambassador Reich laughed. A warm sound that somehow made me feel both better and worse. Kelrith, there's no formula. You just try it. If something's not working and you can't figure out why, sometimes you give it a whack and see what happens. But that's not engineering. That's guessing. That's random chance. Is it though? He set down the device he'd been working on and gave me his full attention. Look, here's the thing about human technology. We didn't start with the perfect solution. We started with rocks and sticks. We built up from there, one mistake at a time, one accident at a time, one lucky discovery at a time, and we learned that complicated things break in complicated ways, but simple things break in simple ways.
But we have the capability to build things that don't break at all.
Do you though? He raised an eyebrow. Because your cruiser broke, Your perfect, quantum-stabilized 17 redundancy system cruiser broke, and all your sophisticated diagnostics couldn't tell you why, and all your precise engineering couldn't fix it. But a boot could. I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it, because he was right. Absolutely infuriatingly right. We have a saying back on Earth. The ambassador continued. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. You Andorians, you're chasing perfection, building these incredibly sophisticated systems that work flawlessly, until they don't, and then nobody knows how to fix them because they're too complex to understand when they fail. So your solution is to build inferior systems? No, our solution is to build fixable systems. Systems that can fail and be repaired quickly, by regular people with basic tools, because we learned a long time ago that complexity is a luxury, and when you're stuck on a broken ship in deep space, or stranded on a hostile planet, or just trying to get to a meeting on time, you don't need perfection. You need something that works. I thought about the research I'd done, the duct tape and WD-40, the percussive maintenance, the zip ties and jiggling wires. All of it suddenly clicked into place in a way that made terrible, wonderful sense. You're engineering for survival, not sophistication, I said slowly. Exactly. He pointed at me enthusiastically. You get it. Look, your technology is amazing, don't get me wrong. It's elegant and beautiful and probably mathematically perfect, but it's fragile in its own way. It depends on everything working exactly right all the time. Human tech. It's messy and imperfect, but it's robust. It's adaptable. It's forgiving. If it's stupid but it works, it isn't stupid, I quoted, and he grinned. Now you're thinking like a human. I'm not sure that's a compliment, I said, but I was smiling too. Sure it is. He picked up his device again, made an adjustment with a tool that looked like it could function as either a screwdriver or a weapon. You know what the real difference is between your people and mine? You engineer for the ideal scenario. We engineer for the scenario where everything's already gone wrong. I sat there for a long moment, processing that, processing all of it. The human approach to technology wasn't ignorance, or laziness or lack of sophistication. It was a completely different philosophy born from a completely different experience. Humans had spent millennia making things work with limited resources, limited knowledge, limited everything, so they'd learned to be practical, to be adaptable, to value function over form. Meanwhile, we'd spent millennia in relative comfort and stability, building technology that reflected our orderly society, precise, because we could afford precision, complex, because we had the luxury of complexity, perfect, because we'd never really needed anything less. Ambassador, I said finally, I think I've been approaching engineering completely wrong for my entire career. Or, he said kindly, you've been approaching it exactly right for your circumstances. Maybe the real trick is knowing when to use which approach. Sometimes you need Andorian precision, sometimes you need human practicality, and sometimes you just need to kick things. Sometimes, he agreed, laughing, you just need to kick things. 2 months later, I was training a new engineer on the transport systems. Young kid, fresh out of the academy, full of enthusiasm and textbook knowledge. We were doing a routine inspection when one of the stabilizer displays started flickering. Oh no, the kid said, reaching for his diagnostic scanner. We need to run a full system analysis, check the power distribution, verify the quantum processors. Hold on, I said, and walked over to the display panel. I hit it. Not hard. Just a firm tap with the heel of my hand. The flickering stopped. The kid stared at me like I'd just violated every law of physics which 6 months ago I would have agreed with. Percussive maintenance, I explained. It's a human thing. But that shouldn't work. I smiled, thinking about Ambassador Reich and his terrible, wonderful logic. You know what the problem is with the universe, I said. It doesn't respect our assumptions about physics. Sometimes, things just need a little encouragement. The kid looked confused. He'd learn. They always do.